Why you wouldn't survive 24 hours as a Roman emperor? You probably think being a Roman emperor was the ultimate power trip, right? Marble pools, endless banquets, the entire world bowing at your feet. Well, prepare to have your perception completely shattered, because the reality of being a Roman emperor was so brutally lethal that you'd have better chances of survival fighting naked against lions in the arena than sitting on the most powerful throne in the world. Here's a fact that'll blow your mind. Of the first 26 Roman emperors, only 6 died from natural causes. That means you'd have a 77% chance of being assassinated, poisoned, or executed. To put this in perspective, professional gladiators had a mortality rate of approximately 50% per combat. You would literally have better survival odds being thrown into an arena with wild beasts than ruling the Roman Empire. But wait, it gets much worse. The average life expectancy of an emperor was only 7 years in power. 7 years! Experienced gladiators often fought for decades. Meanwhile, emperors, the most powerful men on earth, were constantly counting down the days until someone stuck a dagger in their backs or poured arsenic into their wine cups. And here's the truly terrifying part. You wouldn't die by chance or bad luck. Your death would be mathematically inevitable. Every decision you made would create new enemies. Every person you promoted would become a potential threat. Every general you appointed could march back to Rome with his legions to overthrow you. The very act of being emperor was, essentially, slow political suicide. From the moment the imperial crown touched your head, you become target number 1 for literally millions of people. Ambitious senators, traitorous generals, members of your own family, and even your personal guards. And unlike gladiators, who at least knew when the fight was starting, you'd be in mortal combat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for the rest of your extremely short life. If you thought imperial paranoia was just a philosophical concern, wait until you discover what happened at the first meal of the day. Your breakfast as emperor wasn't simply eating and heading off to work. It was literally a complex military operation where a single mistake meant instant death. And even doing everything right could still kill you. Here is something that will chill you. Roman emperors needed at least 12 different people tasting every item of their morning meal before you took a single bite. But it wasn't a quick taste and done. Each taster had to wait exactly 30 minutes after eating to ensure slow-acting poisons did unkill them in front of you. This means your quick breakfast took at minimum 2 hours to consume safely. But wait, it gets much worse. The poisons used by Roman assassins were so sophisticated that some only took effect after multiple doses. So even if your tasters survived today, you could be slowly poisoned over weeks without knowing. Emperors like Britannicus were killed with poisons that perfectly mimicked the symptoms of natural diseases. You could be dying from the first sip of wine and never know it. And here, the truly sick part. The food tasters themselves were frequently bribed or threatened to allow poisoned food to reach you. Claudius was assassinated by his own wife Agrippina, who bribed the official taster to ignore the deadly mushrooms in the emperor's dinner. The man whose sole function was to keep you alive literally took money to kill you. The paranoia was so extreme that some emperors actually had tasters for their tasters. Caligula ordered different servants to taste the same food at different times, then compared their physical reactions. If one taster sweated more than another, or if their pupils dilated differently, he assumed attempted poisoning and executed the entire kitchen staff. You couldn't even enjoy your food. Every bite would be accompanied by the terror that this might be your last. And the cruel irony is that many emperors died not from the poison they feared, but from stomach ulcers caused by the constant stress of trying not to be poisoned. Your fear of death would literally kill you. If you thought having elite personal guards would keep you safe, prepare to discover the most terrifying truth about Roman imperial power. The Praetorian Guard, the supposed supreme protectors of the emperor, assassinated more emperors than all other threats combined. These men had total access to you, knew your every move, and literally slept outside your bedroom. And they would kill you without hesitation for the right price. Here is a fact that will destroy any sense of security you might have. The Praetorian Guard directly assassinated at least 13 different emperors. This doesn't include those they allowed to be killed by simply refusing to protect them. These weren't isolated, dishonest, or corrupt soldiers. It was a systematic institution of betrayal where killing the emperor was practically part of the job description. But wait, it gets absolutely disturbing. In 193 AD, the Praetorian Guard literally auctioned off the Roman Empire. After assassinating Emperor Pertinax, they put the imperial position up for public auction and sold it to the highest bidder. Imagine this. The men paid to die for you, decided it was more worthwhile to kill you and sell your job to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus bought the empire for 25,000 sesterces per. He lasted exactly 66 days before being executed. And here's the truly sick part of the situation. You couldn't fire the Praetorian Guard. They were too powerful, too well-armed, and knew all your secrets. Trying to dissolve the Guard would be equivalent to signing your death warrant immediately. But keeping them was also a death sentence. Just a slower one? You were literally trapped in a situation where your protectors were your inevitable executioners. The paranoia reached insane levels. Emperors like Domitian had mirrored walls built in palace corridors, so he could see if Praetorians were approaching from behind. He slept with swords under his pillow, and had secret escape routes in every room. Even so, it was the Praetorians themselves who stabbed him to death in his own bedroom. Most terrible of all is that the Praetorian Guard didn't kill emperors for political or ideological reasons. They killed for money, for boredom, or simply because a new emperor would pay better. Caligula was assassinated by his own guards because they thought he was getting too boring. Your job was literally so tedious that they would kill you just to have something interesting to do. If you thought food tasters solved the poisoning problem, you're about to discover how Roman assassins transformed every imperial meal into a masterpiece of psychological terror. The poisons used against emperors were so sophisticated and cruelly crafted that even eating the safest food in the world could still kill you in ways you'd never imagine. Here's something that will make you paranoid forever. Roman assassins developed poisons that only worked when combined with specific foods. Locusta, Nero's official poisoner, created substances that were completely harmless alone, but became lethal when mixed with wine or when ingested along with certain spices. This meant you could eat the same meal as your tasters and still die, because the chemical combination only happened in your stomach. But wait, it gets absolutely diabolical. Some poisons were designed to perfectly mimic natural diseases, but with a sadistic twist. They killed slowly, over weeks, making you waste away publicly while your enemies watched you lose your sanity. Britannicus was poisoned with a substance that first caused convincing epileptic seizures. When doctors tried to treat him for epilepsy, the real poison reacted with the medicines and killed him instantly. And here est the truly terrifying part. Poisoners developed substances that could be applied to objects you would touch days later. Caligula nearly died from poison applied to the pages of a parchment he would read a week later. The poison would be absorbed through the skin of your fingers as you turned the pages. You could be poisoning yourself by touching any surface in the palace without even eating anything. The sophistication reached insane levels. Locusta created adjustable poisons. Substances that could kill in minutes, hours, or months, depending on the dosage. This allowed assassins to control exactly when you would die, creating perfect alibis for themselves. They could poison you on Monday, and you'd only die on Friday, when they were already on the other side of the empire. Most disturbing of all is that some emperors ended up developing such extreme food paranoia that they stopped eating completely and died of starvation trying to avoid poisoning. Tiberius in his final years survived only on goat milk. He milked himself, but even so, died under suspicious circumstances. The cruel irony is that his obsession with avoiding poison probably killed him faster than any toxic substance ever would. If you thought at least your personal hygiene would be a moment of peace and relaxation, prepare to discover how even bathing as a Roman emperor could result in your brutal and immediate death. Imperial cleansing rituals were assassination minefields where every drop of water, every ointment, and every moment of vulnerability were perfect opportunities for your enemies to eliminate you. Here is something that will terrify you! Roman emperors could not even shave themselves without risk of death. Caligula was nearly assassinated by his own barber, who had been bribed to accidentally cut his throat during the morning procedure. The imperial barber had total access to your neck with a sharp razor every day, essentially becoming a potential assassin with perfect alibis. This is why many later emperors stopped shaving completely, preferring long beards to the risk of having their throats cut. But wait, it gets much more sinister. The waters of imperial thermal baths were constantly poisoned. We're not just talking about adding toxic substances to the water. Assassins developed poisons that were absorbed through the skin during long baths. Commodus nearly died from a poison applied to bath oils that caused gradual paralysis. As you relaxed in the warm water, you would literally absorb your own death through your skin's pores. And here, the truly diabolical part. The servants, responsible for drying you after bathing, frequently applied lethal substances to the towels. Hadrian developed mysterious skin eruptions that modern doctors believe were caused by contact poisons applied to fabrics that touched his wet skin. You would emerge from your bath feeling clean and refreshed, unaware that you had just covered yourself with deadly toxic agents. Hygiene paranoia reached insane extremes. Domitian ordered that all his bathing utensils be made of pure gold, not for luxury, but because he believed gold would reveal poisons by changing color. He had special tasters for every soap, every oil, and even for the bath water. The process of taking a safe bath took more than 4 hours and involved dozens of people. Most disturbing of all is that many emperors died not during bathing, but from infections caused by irritating substances secretly applied to their towels and clean clothes. They would develop open wounds that never healed, allowing more potent poisons to be applied directly to the bloodstream through the lesions. Their obsession with cleanliness literally created the wounds that would allow their later death. The cruel irony was that trying to stay clean and healthy became the most direct path to a slow and agonizing death. If you thought physical dangers were the worst aspect of being emperor, prepare to discover how the real killer was your own mind. Imperial paranoia was unjust and inconvenient personality trait. It was an accelerated and systematic mental deterioration that transformed perfectly sane men into hallucinating lunatics within weeks. And once it started, there was no way to stop it. Here is something that will haunt you. Newly crowned emperors frequently developed what modern doctors recognize as acute psychotic episodes within 72 hours of assuming power. Caligula was considered a charismatic and mentally stable young man until he became emperor. In less than a month, he was talking to statues, declaring war against the ocean, and appointing his horse as consul. This was on eccentricity. It was total mental collapse caused by the impossible psychological pressure of trusting literally no one. But wait, it gets absolutely terrifying. Imperial paranoia created feedback loops that exponentially accelerated insanity. The more paranoid you became, the more people you would execute for treason. The more people you executed, the more real enemies you would create. The more real enemies you had, the more justified your paranoia would become. It was a vicious cycle that guaranteed you would completely lose touch with reality within months. And here is the truly diabolical part. Emperors developed auditory and visual hallucinations, so convincing that they began acting based on completely imaginary threats. Domitian hired spies to watch his own reflections in mirrors, because he was certain his reflection was conspiring against him. He reached the point of executing servants for looking conspiratorially at reflective surfaces in his presence. His mind had created enemies that literally didn't exist. Sleep deprivation made everything infinitely worse. Paranoid emperors frequently stayed awake entire nights, certain that sleeping meant certain death. Caracalla didn't sleep properly for more than 2 years in his final years of life. The extreme sleep deprivation caused tactical hallucinations so vivid that he would attack guards who swore loyalty to him, certain they were disguised assassins. His own mental exhaustion created the dangerous situations he so feared. Most disturbing of all is that paranoia became contagious. Insane emperors psychologically infected everyone around them, creating an atmosphere of collective terror where even completely innocent people began acting suspiciously, just from fear of being executed for appearing suspicious. Eventually, no one in the palace could distinguish between real threats and collective paranoia. The emperor's madness literally drove the entire empire insane, guaranteeing that his death would become not just probable, but mathematically inevitable, because at some point someone would decide that killing the mad emperor was the only way to restore sanity to the world. If you thought, at least in the privacy of your imperial chamber, you could rest, Prepare to discover how sleep became the most dangerous and terrifying moment of the entire imperial experience. Sleeping as a Roman emperor was unrest. It was essentially an 8-hour voluntary coma where you were completely defenseless, while dozens of people with access to your room had perfect opportunities to assassinate you. Here is something that will leave you insomniac forever. Roman emperors slept with at least 6 armed guards inside their actual bedroom. But these same guards were statistically the most likely to kill you during the night. Caligula ordered different guards to be responsible for each hour of dawn. But discover this only created more opportunities for coordinated assassination. Each changing of the guard was a moment of vulnerability where conspirators could coordinate their attack. But wait, it gets absolutely terrifying. Emperors developed sleep rituals so paranoid and complex that the process of going to bed took more than 3 hours every night. Domitian had his servants completely dismantle his bed each night to search for hidden blades, poisons applied to sheets, or mechanical strangulation devices. He slept in a different room each night, chosen randomly at the last second. But even so, woke up multiple times during dawn, certain that someone had discovered his location. And here's the truly diabolical part. Assassins developed specific methods for killing emperors during sleep that were almost impossible to detect. They used extremely fine, poisoned needles that could be inserted through pillows without waking the victim. The emperor simply wouldn't wake up the next morning, and the cause of death would seem completely natural. Some poisons were designed to simulate natural cardiac arrests that only happened during deep sleep. Sleep deprivation became a cycle of slow death. The less you slept, the more paranoid you became. The more paranoid you became, the less you could sleep. Caracalla, in his final months, slept at most 2 hours per night, frequently waking in total panic, convinced that assassins were in the room. He reached the point of physically attacking his own guards during episodes of night terror, creating situations where they legitimately needed to defend themselves, giving them perfect justification to kill him. Most disturbing of all is that many emperors developed such extreme terror of sleeping that they began using substances to stay awake indefinitely. But these drugs caused hallucinations so vivid that they could no longer distinguish between dreams and reality. Commodus spent his final months in a state of semi-consciousness, where he executed people for crimes they had committed only in his drug-induced delirium. Eventually, his own refusal to sleep left him so mentally unstable that even his closest allies agreed he needed to die. The cruel irony was that trying to avoid being assassinated during sleep guaranteed you would be assassinated while awake because your insomnia made you too dangerous to be kept alive. If you thought at least imperial sex life would be an enjoyable aspect of power, prepare to discover how even intimacy became an arena of political terror, where every romantic encounter could result in your death, blackmail, or total mental collapse. Imperial sexuality was about pleasure. It was about survival in a web of manipulation, where every partner was a potential assassin in disguise. Here is something that will shock you. Roman emperors couldn't have spontaneous sexual relations with anyone without a prior security investigation that lasted weeks. Every potential sexual partner, wife, concubine, or casual encounter underwent extensive interrogations, invasive medical examinations, and constant surveillance by imperial intelligence services. Caligula reached the point of demanding that potential lovers be tested by specialized servants before any physical contact, transforming intimacy into a medical military procedure. But wait, it gets absolutely disturbing. Women were frequently planted in the imperial bed specifically to assassinate, blackmail, or drive the emperor insane. Messalina, Claudius's wife, organized a network of prostitutes and concubines, whose real job was to collect compromising information and apply hallucinogenic substances during intimate moments. Some women applied poisons through kisses. Others used toxic ointments applied during caresses. The sexual act literally became Russian roulette of chemical death. And here's the truly diabolical part. Emperors were constantly blackmailed with information about their sexual preferences, intimate performance, and physical inadequacies collected by spies during private moments. Tiberius was psychologically tortured for years with detailed rumors about his supposed sexual perversions in Capri, even if the accusations were completely false. The mere existence of intimate speculations destroyed his political and mental authority, Sexual paranoia reached insane extremes. Domitian installed special mirrors around his bed, not for voyeurism, but to detect hidden assassins during intimate moments. He developed such extreme terror of sexual vulnerability that he began wearing light armor during conjugal relations, convinced that his own wives would try to stab him during climax. The act that should be the most natural and relaxing of human experiences became a military operation with multiple security layers. Most disturbing of all is that many emperors developed severe sexual dysfunctions caused by extreme psychological stress, and these performance failures were immediately exploited by political enemies as evidence of imperial weakness. Caligula became impotent for months due to paranoia, and this information leaked to the Senate, being used as justification for his assassination. The cruel irony was that trying to protect yourself during intimacy guaranteed you would fail and failing sexually guaranteed your enemies would have political ammunition to justify your execution. Your own attempt at sexual self-preservation became the weapon your assassins would use to destroy your legitimacy as both man and emperor. If you thought you could be a balanced emperor and make sensible political choices, prepare to discover the most devastating truth about imperial power. No matter what your first decision as emperor was, it would automatically seal your death fate. The Roman political system was designed so diabolically that any action you took would create mortal enemies. And an action would also guarantee your execution. Hear us, the trap that destroyed literally every emperor. Your first decision had to be about the army. If you increased soldiers' pay, the Senate would consider you a dangerous populist and conspire against you. If you cut military spending, generals would organize a revolt to depose you. If you maintained the status quo, both groups would see you as weak and indecisive, guaranteeing they'd attack you simultaneously. Pertinax lasted exactly 87 days because he tried to cut military spending. Didius Julianus lasted 66 days because he tried to buy soldiers' loyalty. There was no right choice. But wait. It gets mathematically impossible. Your second mandatory decision was about taxes. Reducing taxes would make people love you, but would bankrupt the imperial treasury, forcing you to confiscate property from the rich, who would immediately hire assassins. Increasing taxes would fund the empire, but would cause popular revolts that would end with you being lynched by the Messiah. Keeping taxes the same meant existing economic problems would worsen, and you'd be blamed for every subsequent crisis. Caracalla was assassinated by his own soldiers after increasing their salaries because he had to raise taxes to pay for it. And here is the truly diabolical part of the system. Every power group expected you to favor them immediately, but favoring any group automatically made all the others your mortal enemies. The Senate expected you to respect their republican traditions. The army expected you to be a conquering general. The people expected you to be a generous benefactor. The Praetorians expected special privileges. The provinces expected autonomy. It was literally impossible to satisfy one group without enraging the other four. The mathematical cruelty was absolute. Good emperors died faster than cruel emperors. Pertinax tried to be fair and died in 3 months. Galba tried to be fiscally responsible and was decapitated in 7 months. Alexander Severus tried to be pious and was assassinated by his own army. Meanwhile, Caligula, completely insane, lasted for years, and Domitian brutal, paranoid, ruled for 15 years. The system rewarded psychopathy and punished decency. Most terrifying of all is that some emperors realized this trap and tried not to make any decisions, delegating everything to subordinates. But this only guaranteed that their subordinates would accumulate enough power to assassinate you and take control. Claudius survived for years being underestimated as a harmless idiot. But the moment he demonstrated real competence, his own wife poisoned him. The final and cruel irony was that the only way to avoid death by incompetence was to demonstrate competence, but demonstrating competence guaranteed death for being a threat. Imperial power was a death sentence disguised as a prize, and your first decision only determined whether you'd die fast or slow. If you thought at least in matters of justice, you could find some political security, prepare to discover the most lethal paradox of imperial power. Every judicial decision you made created mortal enemies, regardless of whether it was merciful or severe. The Roman justice system was a perfect psychological trap where showing clemency or cruelty equally guaranteed your violent death. Here's the impossible equation that killed dozens of emperors. If you executed traitors, the victims' families would swear eternal revenge against you and your descendants. But if you pardon traitors, they would immediately interpret your mercy as weakness and conspire again, only this time more carefully. Galbo was assassinated because he executed too many conspirators. Otho was forced to suicide because he forgave his enemies, who regrouped and attacked him with full force. But wait, the logic gets even more perverse. Executing innocent people as a precaution made you seen as a paranoid tyrant who needed to be eliminated for Rome. Good. But waiting for concrete evidence of treason meant giving real traitors time to complete their plans and assassinate you first. Domitian executed people for dreaming they betrayed him and was killed for it. Pertinax waited for real proof of conspiracy and died before obtaining it. And here's the truly diabolical part. The Roman legal system allowed treason accusations to be made anonymously, creating a constant flood of false denunciations that you couldn't simply ignore. If you investigated every accusation, you'd spend all your time chasing ghosts while real conspiracies developed freely. If you ignored the denunciations, you'd be accused of imperial negligence when some real conspiracy finally attacked you. Caracalla spent 2 years investigating a false treason report, and during that time his own officers organized the coup that killed him. Judicial paranoia created cycles of unstoppable self-destruction. The more people you executed for treason, the more real traitors you created among the families and friends of victims. The more real traitors existed, the more justified your executions became. But each justified execution created more families thirsting for revenge. Nero killed his own mother, wife, and half-brother for treason. But these deaths generated so much hatred that eventually the entire empire turned against him. Most terrifying of all is that some emperors tried to solve the paradox by creating automatic justice systems where other people made life and death decisions. But this only guaranteed you to be seen as an incompetent coward who deserved to be replaced by someone with courage to lead. Claudius delegated many judicial decisions to his freedmen, and this weakness was used as justification for his poisoning. The final and devastating irony was that trying to avoid responsibility for difficult decisions guaranteed you to be killed for being a weak leader. But taking responsibility for difficult decisions guaranteed you'd be killed for the consequences of those decisions. It didn't matter if you were Alexander the Great or Caligula the Mad. The imperial justice system was a machine for creating mortal enemies that would eventually turn against you with relentless mathematical force. If you thought at least you could count on the love of the Roman people to stay alive, prepare to discover how the popular massas were the most unpredictable and lethal force any emperor faced. The Roman people were Unte's stable support base. They were a psychotic mob with mood swings so rapid and violent that you could go from acclaimed hero to lynching target within hours. Something that will terrify you. The mood of Roman masseuse could change completely based on absolutely trivial things. Caligula was adored by the people for months until the day he canceled gladiatorial games because he had a headache. In less than 6 hours, furious crowds were screaming for his death in Rome's streets, burning his effigies, and stoning anything that represented the emperor. A simple headache transformed a beloved emperor into a target for instant homicidal hatred. But wait, it gets absolutely insane. Roman popular revolts were unend organized protests. They were explosions of collective violence so brutal they would make modern riots look like Sunday picnics. When people turned against an emperor, they literally wanted to tear him apart with their bare hands. Vitellius was captured by an enraged mob that dragged him through Rome's streets, ripping pieces of flesh from his body while he was still alive, before throwing him into the Tiber River in pieces. And here's the truly diabolical part. You could unpredict or control what would make people turn against you. Sometimes it was lack of bread. Sometimes it was too many taxes. Sometimes it was too few spectacles. But frequently it was something completely random like a false rumor, an eclipse interpreted as a bad omen, or simply the fact that you appeared in public on the wrong day. Nero was hated by the people not for his real cruelties, but because a false rumor said he had sung while Rome burned. The speed of changes was mathematically impossible to keep up with. Otho was idolized by the masses on Monday, but by Wednesday, crowds were invading the imperial palace, trying to kill him because someone spread the rumor that he had insulted a popular gladiator. In 72 hours, you could go from living god to public enemy number one because of gossip you didn't even know existed. Most terrifying of all is that popular revolts were contagious and spread through the city at a speed that made escape impossible. An enraged crowd on one Rome corner could transform into 100,000 bloodthirsty people in less than 2 hours. They would block all city exits, invade imperial palaces, and literally hunt the emperor like a wild animal. Maximinus Thrax was surrounded in his own military camp by furious peasants who killed him with agricultural tools because he had requisitioned grain for the army. The final and devastating irony was that trying to please the Roman people was impossible because they were literally insatiable. The more you gave, the more they demanded. And the moment you failed to meet their growing demands, they would become a force of destruction, so brutal and relentless that not even your own soldiers could protect you from the fury of the If you thought at least imperial doctors would work to keep you alive and healthy, prepare to discover how Roman medicine was essentially a sophisticated form of torture and assassination disguised as medical care. The treatments prescribed by imperial physicians didn't just fail to cure anything. They actively poisoned, mutilated, and killed emperors on a scale that would make modern serial killers feel like amateurs. Here, as something that will horrify you. Standard medical treatment for any imperial health problem involved. Massive bloodletting that literally drained the life out of emperors. Roman doctors believed that draining between 2 to 4 liters of blood would cure everything from headaches to digestive problems. Hadrian died not from his original disease, but from bloodletting so extreme that his body simply couldn't produce enough blood to keep his vital organs functioning. He was literally emptied to death by his own doctors. But wait! It gets absolutely diabolical. Imperial medicines were toxic cocktails of deadly substances that doctors genuinely believed were curative. Liquid mercury was prescribed for male vigor problems. Lead powder was mixed into wine to calm the nerves. Arsenic was given in small doses to strengthen the constitution. Claudius was slowly poisoned for years, not by assassins, but by his own doctors who were treating his stutter with regular doses of lead. His lead poisoning symptoms were interpreted as signs of improvement. And here's the truly terrifying part. Roman surgical procedures were performed without anesthesia, with non-sterilized instruments, by people who had no idea about basic anatomy. When Antoninus Pius developed abdominal problems, imperial doctors decided to fix the problem by making exploratory incisions in his stomach. While he was conscious and screaming, the resulting infection killed him in indescribable agony a week later. The procedure was considered a partial success because they found the problem. Imperial medicine also included psychiatric treatments that were essentially systematic torture. Emperors who showed signs of stress or paranoia were subjected to purifications involving forced fasts for weeks, baths in boiling water, and ingestion of hallucinogenic substances to balance the humors. Caligula developed his homicidal tendencies after a medical treatment for depression that included sleep deprivation for 10 consecutive days and ingestion of plant extracts that modern doctors have identified as highly Most disturbing of all is that imperial doctors were frequently bribed by political enemies to treat emperors to death with methods that seemed legitimate. Commodus was treated for a supposed heart condition with increasing doses of digitalis, a substance that in small amounts can help the heart, but in larger doses causes fatal cardiac arrest. His doctors gradually increased the dosage over months, creating the appearance of natural death from heart failure. The final and cruel irony was that trusting imperial medicine to stay healthy guaranteed you would die faster and in more agony than if you simply ignored all symptoms and hoped your body would heal itself. The doctors who swore to keep you alive became your most efficient slowly killing you while you paid them and thanked them for their care. If you thought, at least you could trust your own body to keep you alive. Prepare to discover the most devastating truth about the imperial experience. The extreme psychological stress of being a Roman emperor literally destroyed your body from the inside out, transforming it into a self-destruction machine that accelerated your death in ways no assassin could ever achieve. Here is something that will terrify you. Emperors developed physical symptoms so severe in the first weeks of power that modern doctors would classify them as total systemic collapse. Otho began losing hair in clumps after 3 days as emperor. His skin developed bloody eruptions that never healed. His teeth began to soften and fall out. In less than a month, he appeared to have aged 20 years, and soldiers who knew him before commented that he had become unrecognizable. His body literally disintegrated under the psychological weight of imperial power. But wait, it gets absolutely terrifying. Imperial stress caused cascading organ failures that created a vicious cycle of accelerated deterioration. Galba developed stomach ulcers so severe he would vomit blood during public audiences. The constant pain prevented him from sleeping, causing hallucinations that worsened his paranoia, which in turn worsened the ulcers in an unstoppable downward spiral. When he was finally assassinated, the autopsy revealed his stomach was literally perforated in multiple places. He would have died from internal hemorrhaging within days, even without the fatal blow. And here, the truly diabolical part. The imperial body turned against itself in ways that seemed supernatural. Caracalla developed a condition where his own skin rejected any fabric that touched his body. Clothes caused open wounds that became infected instantly. He spent his final months wearing only a special tunic made of silk treated with substances that cost more than a centurion's annual salary. And even so, his skin continued deteriorating. Soldiers whispered that the gods had cursed his flesh. Mental deterioration accelerated physical destruction at a speed that defied medical explanation. Domitian, in his final years, developed a condition where any loud sound caused violent convulsions. Applause during public ceremonies made him go into spasms so severe that he broke ribs multiple times simply from muscle contractions. The constant fear of assassination had reprogrammed his nervous system to interpret normal stimuli as death threats, transforming his own body into a trap of destructive reflexes. Most disturbing of all is that some emperors literally died of terror before any assassin had a chance to kill them. Vitellius developed a condition where his heart stopped beating every time he heard approaching footsteps. Doctors on standby had to remain constantly at his side with cardiac stimulants, because he died several times daily from cardiac arrests. On the morning he was finally assassinated, he had already died and been resuscitated 4 times before breakfast. The final and devastating irony was that trying to stay alive as emperor guaranteed that your own body would become your worst enemy, creating diseases and conditions so severe that death by assassination frequently came as merciful relief compared to the agony of living trapped in a carcass that had turned completely against its own existence. If you thought at least you could trust the unconditional loyalty of your own family, prepared to discover the most devastating and psychologically destructive truth about imperial power. Your own children were just potential successors. They were your most likely and most dangerous assassins. Imperial family dynamics were a bloody battlefield where paternal love became fatal weakness and trust was a death sentence. Here's something that will destroy any notion of family security you might have. Statistically, Roman emperors were more likely to be assassinated by their own children than by external enemies. Caracalla killed his brother Geta right in front of their mother, Julia Domna, while screaming that there could only be one emperor. Commodus spent years planning his father Marcus Aurelius's assassination, because he didn't want to wait for natural death. Imperial lineage was Unte family. It was a homicidal competition where kinship meant privileged access to kill you. But wait! It gets absolutely diabolical. The imperial succession system created mathematical incentives for sons to kill fathers prematurely. The longer you lived, the longer your children had to wait for supreme power. The longer they waited, the greater the chance you'd name a different successor, or they'd die before inheriting the throne. Every additional year of imperial life was literally one less year of life for your heirs. Your own children calculated your death as an investment in their political career. And here's the truly terrifying part. Imperial children had total access to your routine, knew your intimate vulnerabilities, and could approach you without raising guards' suspicions. Domitian was warned by oracles that he would be assassinated by someone close as blood, so he executed multiple distant relatives. But he ignored his own adopted sons, who organized his death, because they had unrestricted access to his private quarters. His assassins didn't need to force entry. They had keys. Family paranoia destroyed emperors psychologically before any physical assassination. Septimius Severus spent his final years testing his son's loyalty through elaborate traps, giving them false information to see if it would leak, offering them opportunities for betrayal to test their reactions. When he discovered both sons were indeed planning to kill him, he developed depression so severe he stopped eating and died from voluntary malnutrition. Knowledge of family betrayal killed him more efficiently than any poison. Most disturbing of all is that some emperors tried to prevent filial assassinations by executing their own heirs preventively. But this only guaranteed that other family members or ambitious generals would kill them for having no clear succession. Constantine killed his own son Crispus on suspicion of treason, creating a succession crisis that resulted in decades of civil war. The final and devastating irony was that trusting your children guaranteed they would kill you when convenient for them. But distrusting your children guaranteed you would die alone and hated, without true allies to protect you from other enemies. Imperial fatherhood was a death sentence disguised as legacy, where raising heirs literally meant creating your own future executioners. Your children did not wait to inherit your empire. They plan to take it from your dead hands. Now that you know all the horrors you would face as a Roman emperor, it is time for the final truth. Exactly how you would die in your first 24 hours of power, based on historical patterns of imperial assassinations and the speed with which new emperors created mortal enemies. Your death wouldn't be a question of if, but of when and how. And the statistics are mathematically terrifying. Here's how your final day would unfold with almost scientific precision. At 6 a.m., during your first imperial meal, you would survive breakfast only because poisoners hadn't yet had time to bribe your food tasters. At 9 a.m., during your first public audience, you would make your first political decision: increase, decrease, or maintain the Praetorian Guards' salaries. Whatever your choice, you would create mortal enemies who would begin planning your execution immediately. At 11 a.m., you would receive your first military report demanding a response about frontier campaigns. Approving the campaign would make the Senate consider you a dangerous militarist. Refusing, it would mark you for deposition by generals. At 2 p.m., during lunch, the first slow-acting poisons would already be applied to your utensils by servants, bribed by rival factions that formed during the previous 5 hours. But here's the truly inevitable part. At 4 p.m., you would begin feeling the first physical symptoms of imperial stress. Heart palpitations, cold sweats, throbbing headaches. Your own body would be entering collapse under extreme psychological pressure. At 5 p.m., during a meeting with senators, you would be forced to make decisions about executing traitors, people who conspired against your predecessor. Executing them would create family vendettas. Pardoning them would confirm fatal weakness. And here comes the statistically most probable moment of your death. At 6:30 p.m., during dinner with your imperial family. Based on historical patterns, you would be assassinated not by external enemies, but by someone sitting at the same table. An impatient son, an ambitious wife, or a brother-in-law conspiring with The method would be poisoning with fast-acting substances applied to your wine cup during a toast in your honor. The first symptoms would appear in 15 minutes. Convulsions, bloody vomiting, gradual paralysis. You would have enough consciousness to realize you were dying, but couldn't speak or move. Your loved ones would watch with false expressions of concern while you writhed in agony for approximately 8 minutes before final cardiac arrest. Most terrifying of all is that this sequence of events is UNT speculation. It is the real pattern followed by dozens of who died in their first weeks of power. The only variation would be the specific assassination method and exact identity of the assassin, but the timeline would be virtually identical. You wouldn't die because you made wrong choices, or because you were unlucky. You would die because the Roman imperial system was a machine, perfectly designed to destroy any person placed in its position of supreme power. The final and devastating irony is that you would spend your last conscious hours not fighting external enemies, but gradually realizing there was no possible escape from a trap that had been built centuries before your birth. The Roman Empire didn't need specific emperors. It needed sacrificial victims to feed its political machine of power. And you would be just another offering on that bloody altar of unbridled human ambition. So there you have the brutal truth that no history book dares tell completely. Being a Roman emperor was under the height of power and privilege. It was a death sentence disguised as a golden crown. You wouldn't rule the world, you would be devoured by it. From the moment that imperial crown touched your head, you would become the most powerful man on earth and simultaneously the most doomed person on the planet. Every breath would be borrowed. Every meal, Russian roulette. Every night's sleep, potentially your last. Your protectors would be your executioners. Your family, your most likely assassins. Your own body would turn against you with a ferocity that would make your worst enemies seem like friends. And the cruelest irony of all. You would die not because you were weak or incompetent, but because the system was designed to kill anyone placed in that position. Good emperors died. Bad emperors died. Mad emperors died. Sane emperors died. The only constant was death, arriving with relentless mathematical precision. The Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years, not despite constantly assassinating its leaders, but precisely because of it. It was a political machine that functioned by consuming emperors as fuel, ensuring no one lived long enough to accumulate real power sufficient to threaten the system itself. So next time you watch a movie about the glory of Rome, or read about the absolute power of the Caesars, remember the truth. Those men weren't gods. They were the most elaborately tortured victims in human history, trapped in a golden cage that looked like a palace, but functioned as a slaughterhouse. You wouldn't survive 24 hours as a Roman emperor because no one was supposed to survive. That's how the system worked. And this is just one of many terrifying truths that official history prefers to hide. If these disturbing facts about imperial power made you question everything you thought you knew about the past, then you're ready to discover more secrets that will make these seem like fairy tales. Because trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. History hides its darkest truths in plain sight. If you want to uncover the next forbidden secret, hit like and subscribe right now.